So the Irish Synodal process has published their synthesis of all the different diocesan reports on this synod. And I just thought it was very interesting reading through it. I'm going to share some of my thoughts about the first read on this and what's missing from this report. And it's quite obvious. Anyone who loves the faith can see what is missing from this report. But anyway, let's just walk you slowly through what is published here, the different sections, and I'll give you my views on what I think of this synthesis of the synodal process in Ireland. So before we start looking at this document, I always think it's good to have a word cloud to get a feel about what are the big discussion points in the document. So this is the word count, and as you can see, the big discussion points about this document is church, process, abuse, faith, young, families, women, people, synodal, national, churches, community, family, sense, and participants, LGBT, and so forth. So this is the word cloud. This is what you're going to encounter in this document. Now, I always find it interesting when we're talking about the synodal process, the church. What is the finality? What is the reason for the existence of this church? So just keep this in mind. Ask yourself, what is the church? Why does it exist? It is to save souls, to bring us to heaven. If you look at canon law, the supreme law is the salvation of souls. So that is the reason why this church exists. But that doesn't seem to be discussed there, salvation of souls and heaven, the real reason we exist, the real reason the church, not mentioned at all there. Anyway, so just so you get a feel for this Irish synthesis, and if people feel I'm a bit frustrated with this document, well, I am frustrated to see what has happened to our beautiful Catholic faith in Ireland. But look, God calls different people for different tasks, and God knows why I'm so involved in this for some reason or the other. But anyway, let's see how we can do to help our beautiful church and to help people know what is true, good and beautiful about our faith and the encounter with Christ. So I'm going to take you through this document. I've been reading it all afternoon. And it's the General Secretariat of the Synod. There is a prayer here. St. Patrick's breastplate starts with the prayer. I think everybody knows that. The introduction, themes. So, abuse as part of the story of the church, co-responsible leadership, clergy, lay ministry, sense of belonging, role of women in the church, LGBTQI++, that alphabet that keeps growing, sexuality and relationships, adult faith formation, liturgy, youth, education and catechesis, family, COVID-19 pandemic culture. Notable issues that were not strongly present from the consultation and conclusion. So it's 22 pages. Okay, so I'm going to post a link to this and you can all read through it. I'm not going to spend all my time going through the document itself, reading it out. You can just walk yourself through it. I'm just going to focus in on some key topics that I find very interesting about this document. It's amazing, what's in there. During this diocesan phase, the synodal process, a deliberate effort was made to reach a wide spectrum of people as possible within the time frame available. It was 5,000 traditional Catholics, and we were a tiny minority, but I don't know. Did they reach us? Did they talk to the Society of St. Pius X to reach out to the different Catholics around Ireland? People might think they're on the fringes and they're extreme, but maybe you could actually listen to see what they had to say. This is a synodal process. Should not all baptized Catholics? We invited Muslims into this process to give their views, as was done in Limerick. It's in the document there. We've seen the speeches. Well, could we not invite traditional Catholics to give speeches to the different processes? Question mark. Facilitators listen to people in urban and rural areas, as well as people who are churchgoers and people who are not. They listen to those who are working, employed, caring for someone at home, families who live alone, and young and elderly. Special care was taken to involve those persons who may be at risk of being excluded. For example, women, members of the LGBTQ community, travellers, ministers, migrants, and refugees. The facility listing process was intentionally held for those who had been most hurt by the church, survivors of abuse perpetrated by the church personnel. I totally agree with that. The individuals were honest and courageous in the way they shared about the abuse in all forms, left an open wound in their lives, an open wound that remains at the heart of the church. Okay, so we'll just go through this. The Holy Spirit was truly present. All in all, this synodal experience gave hope to those involved in the future of the church. All participants wholeheartedly embraced the initial phase of the synodal process and expressed a desire for similar opportunities would be offered again, in a learning to be synodal, they discovered a new way of being church is now emerging in Ireland. Okay. Themes. Okay, the abuse as part of the church. I mean, we've heard so much about the abuse scandal in church, and of course it's horrific. I mean, it's been dragged out on the media ad nauseum, and rightly so, because it's horrific what has happened. So they're speaking about it here. So I encourage you, I'll put a link to the document and you can read through it. There's no words to say. I mean, it should never have happened. It should never have happened. And it's a sad reality. A lot of the things that people would have done 50, 60 years ago, we would consider abuse today were normal then. Physical punishment was normal at home. It was normal at school. That was the way society operated, not just in Catholicism but elsewhere. I mean, things have changed, so we can't retrospectively apply today's standards to what happened 50 years ago. But as far as child sex abuse, obviously, I mean, there was no justification for that at all. Co-responsible leadership, accountability, transparency, participation, sharing, good governance. These are key words used to express the hope of participants for the future of the Church in Ireland when it comes to leadership. These words named what was absent in the lived experience of the Church for many who were responding to the synodal consultation. Many people feel that decision-making and authority are exercised solely by priests and bishops. This power structure provokes discontent, frustration, and anger in the process of decision-making and exercise of authority at all levels of the Church. It was asserted that canon law itself places obstacles to co-responsible leadership, and there is obvious exclusion of laity, in particular women and youth, in the processes and in the leadership's roles, who more generally within the Church. Okay, and a reading of the submission reveals a lack of clarity around leadership roles and responsibility. Parish, pastoral councils, finance committees and other consultative councils should be balanced in the representation of the communities that they are called to represent, and not elitist or groups that simply talk about doing. Instead, the parish, pastoral councils and other representative groups are called to be cultivated as praying and discerning communities of faith whose actions arise from that discernment. Adult faith development resources for lay ministries and collaborative decision making was flagged as poor and non-existent. Exactly. There is no adult faith formation in Ireland. There is no teenage faith formation in Ireland. I mean, religious education in Ireland is not Catholic. The word Catholic. Religious education in Ireland is like a religious philosophy. It's about, let's talk about all religions, expressing beliefs, exploring questions and living our values. I mean, so that people can get an idea, leaving cert syllabus. If you look for the word Catholic, Like, so the word Catholic doesn't, it's Christian. Okay, so you're looking at Christianity, I mean, okay, so you're teaching a child Christianity. That could be, Buddhism, Christianity. Okay, we happen to be Catholic. So we're not Protestants. So we're giving our children a philosophy of religions, Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, giving them a splatter of everything. That's religious education. That's what we give. And then we're asking adult faith development, resources for lay ministries, and collaborative decision making was flagged as poor, non-existent. Of course it's going to be poor, because we have not taught their faith. Hasn't been taught. That's simply it. It's our own goal as Catholics. When you don't teach the faith and you go out and ask for information on a synodal process, what are you going to expect? People that don't know the faith are going to talk about something they actually don't know. They actually don't understand what the Catholic faith is. And this is the sad reality. We're sending a synthesis report to Rome from Catholics who haven't been taught the faith. Simply haven't. Clergy acknowledged in many contexts they are too tired and weary to engage in these developments. However, they are aware that with education of laity could and should be more involved in the co-responsible leadership. Yes, they could be if they knew the faith, if we were taught the faith. We were simply not taught. Such approaches must be faith-based and focus on the model of servant leadership to avoid becoming purely managerial and administrative. Absolutely. Some still feel that the laity should not have a voice in the decision making in the church parish. This is primarily the priest's role. I don't know where they got that from. Even in traditional communities, it's not the case. I mean, it's quite obvious. They're happy to be volunteers that just help when needed rather than be actively involved in leadership. Others, however, are more ready to be involved in the chartering the way forward, especially when it comes through the synodal process. I mean, a parish is run by the laity. Who's going to clean the chapel, open the chapel, finance the chapel, make sure the priest has everything he needs for his role. Laity have their role, priests have their role. You work together. I mean, a chapel wouldn't exist without the laity, and we need a priest to offer the sacrifice of the Mass. It's a teamwork. It has always been the case. But somehow some people think today it's only the clergy that should manage it. I don't know. Clergy participants express much appreciation for our priests. Their dedication, hard work, presence and pastoral care was frequently acknowledged during the consultative process. Many of these responding to the synod recognised they were overworked and often feel burdened in the weight of governance administration. In the submissions, there is a lot of concern expressed about our ageing clergy. The role of the priest is valued and will continue to play an essential role in the communities of faith. Some participants were concerned that some younger priests were very traditional and rigid. Oh, go figure. Why are younger priests traditional and rigid? They're fed up with the liberalism. They're fed up, people are fed up with the 1970s style, kumbaya, get the guitars out. It doesn't challenge a generation. There's a whole young generation that wants to be challenged. People are going for these ultra marathons, Ironman stuff, fasting, God knows everything, all of these different secular challenges. Where's the religious challenge? I despair sometimes when I read this. There were calls for better training for our clergy. Oh, you would think. Look at who we've been sending into Maynooth for the last 20 years. I'm sorry. Need I say more? Better training of the religious. There's a whole generation of men that have been turned off going to Maynooth because of what has gone on in Maynooth. And need I talk about Thurles Seminary in the 1990s, what went on there? I mean, guys, it's gone from one extreme to another extreme, extremely, maybe too rigid to extremely liberal, accepting any Joe, Dick and Harry that comes through the door into a seminary without proper discernment. And then when these priests happen to be ordained, they fail. Priests need to be formed in the skills required to minister and lead in a synodal church. Some priests themselves say they would need this assistance. Others were reluctant to let go of long-held roles. Others felt edged out with diminishing power and relevancy. At a national pre-synodal assembly, concern was raised that the voice of the clergy was not as prominent as it might have been in the process. Practices varied in terms of whether listening sessions for clergy alone were organised as part of the synodal process. However, the invitation to participate as members in the wider priesthood of the faith was not always accepted, which may speak to the mindset of priests did not see themselves as part of the all in the communal discernment. I think this is it's an awful way of painting priests. These men gave their lives to the faith. On the other hand, clergy often wish to create an environment where parishioners feel free to speak their minds and accordingly absent themselves from public meetings. In some cases, clergy simply chose not to engage. It seems like there's not much leadership in that area. There were calls for both young and old participants for optional celibacy, married priests and female priests. So if you have your bingo card out there for what is going to come out of this synodal process, I'm just saying, optional celibacy, married priest, female priest, bingo, bingo, bingo. It comes out every single time. It's copy paste what they've done in the Anglican Church across the water. So we're just going to copy paste. Come on, Anglicans. Now you know better. That's why your church is completely dead and dying over there. It has done. Copy paste what they've done over there has done nothing to renew the faith. It simply hasn't. The Anglican Church is falling, is dying at a faster rate. And what are we going to do? Copy paste. Anyway, in return to those who have left the priesthood to marry. Clericalism in all its forms was frequently associated with hurt and abuse of power by participants in the process. Some declared that the structures of the church are not inclusive but patriarchal, hierarchical and feudal. The church is hierarchical. That's how Christ left it. It's a hierarchy. Societies have hierarchies. A family has a hierarchy. Children are not equal to their parents. A father has a different role to a mother. The church is hierarchical. So to state the obvious, yes, the church is hierarchical. It has a hierarchy. It has a pope and it has a hierarchy under that. And that's simply the way it will be. And it's a hierarchical that's masculine. They are men. That's how Christ left it. And, if people have a problem with that, they'll have to take it up with him when they get to heaven. There's nothing we can do to change that. To try and say that to move it in another direction would be to divide the church. There was concern expressed that many priests are resistant to change, that they feel they don't have anything further to learn and view the local parish as my parish, not our parish. Well, he's given his life to that parish. There is a sense that the permanent deaconate has been welcomed but not always understood. The new model of selection of bishops was also sought, and a number of participants indicated that they ought to be included in the wider participation of the people of God. Lay ministry. Baptismal calling is at the heart of who we are as Christians. That calling is manifested in a variety of ways, one of which is lay ministry. On the other hand, some respondents see the carrying out of the mission of the church as largely responsible of the clergy, while others recognise the call for greater participation of lay people in the life of the church. Throughout the submissions, we heard similar calls that lay people should be involved in more significant leadership and teaching roles, not just because it will take the burden off the priest, but because it is part of each person's mission as a baptized Catholic. Okay. However, there are challenges. These include the perceived passivity of the parish community and the wider church when it comes to lay ministry. There is an overarching thread evident throughout the consultation that the gifts of lay people are underutilized by the church, that the National Pre-Synodal Assembly, it was noticed that the church should support lay people in their roles as disciples, while the need was felt that some of the lay people should take greater personal responsibility for their role in the church. A submission was returned A submission from return ministries who had worked overseas highlighted how much was learned by working with lay colleagues in various communities in which they served. We had no option but to trust and train lay leaders who gladly undertook the various ministries. In retrospect, it is clear that it was the actual shortage of ordained ministers that enabled the laity to take on the God-given role. While many efforts have been made to enhance the role of lay people in ministry, much remains to be done to encourage and support the training and dedication, enabling lay people in their calling to spread the good news of Jesus Christ in their communities. A call of such training was evident in much of the consultation. It was also acknowledged that while we often speak of aging clergy, we also have an aging laity. Sense of belonging. Okay, we'll go through that. You can read that yourself. Role of women in the church has been mentioned. Those responses was a call for women to be given equal treatment in the church structures in terms of leadership and decision making. As one submission states, women have a special role in the church but are not in equal place. Many women remarked that they are not prepared to be considered second-class citizens anymore, and many are leaving the church, just as more men have left the church than women. I wonder why. It's amazing, you know. They feel that even through the contribution over their years, they have been invaluable. It has been taken for granted. Several submissions call for the ordination of women and permanent deaconate and the priesthood. The exclusion from the deaconate is regarded as particularly hurtful. Some would feel that yet another layer has been added to exclude them. It's amazing. 99% of men in Ireland are not deacons or priests or involved in that. 99% of men, over 99% of men in Ireland are not deacons, are not permanent deacons, are not priests, are not married priests. Everybody has a role to play in the church. A father has his role, a mother has her role. A father can't give birth to a child, a mother can. A father can't feed his child, only a mother can breastfeed her child. You know what I mean? There's complementarity in our roles, our different roles in life, which work together. This is the great confusion in today's society, that unless a man can do everything a woman has, unless a man can actually become a woman in some cases, this is what we're leading people to believe. This is the bizarre area that we've pushed ourselves into, and now this is the copy paste what they've done in the Anglican Church, which has become so woke it's become irrelevant. Many young people cannot understand the church's position on women because they haven't been taught the faith. They do not know what the Catholic faith stands for. Because the disconnect between the church's view on women and the role of women in the wider society today, the church is perceived as patriarchal. Yes, it is. It is. It's hierarchical and it's patriarchal. That's the way it was founded. The man that died on the cross was the Son of God. And by some is misogynistic. It depends what you view as misogyny. The issue of women and gender-based violence was also raised, and a call to challenge of systematic gender inequalities to ensure women's voices are heard and that they have the opportunity to be leaders and take part in the decision-making of the church. The call is also issued to reflect together as a church on the injustice brought upon women by the church and the state and cultural norms in society. As regards gender-based violence, which sadly many women experience, if men understood their faith, if men were men and understood their faith, they would never cause gender-based violence on women. If men understood their faith, they would not be watching pornography. They would not be using women for sex. You know what I mean? Because we are the Catholic faith has been lost, and by many men don't understand it. Then they are lost to the world and the values of the world. And in the world, women are objects for men. That's how the world teaches boys these days. If we look at if we look at media, if we look at the porn industry, and also, so if we got back to teaching the Catholic faith, and in the Catholic faith, a man is supposed to sacrifice his life for his family, for his wife. that's the a man is called to sacrifice, there would not be gender-based violence if the church taught the faith. LGBTQI, there's a clear and overwhelming call for full inclusion of LGBTQI people in the church. TQI, which I don't know, it's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, I don't know what the rest is. There's a clear, overwhelming call for full inclusion of LGBTQI people in the church, expressed by all ages and particularly by the young and members of the LGBTQI communities. The inclusion would be the first instance involved less judgmental language in the church teaching. Following the compassionate approach of Pope Francis has been transformative and is appreciated again by young people in particular. Some called for a change in the church teaching, asking if the church is sufficiently mindful of the developments that regard to human sexuality and the lived reality of LGBTQ couples. It's exactly what the German bishops and what Cardinal Hollerich in Luxembourg have the same, our teaching should change because of developments. Others expressed a concern that the change in the church teaching would simply be conforming to secular standards and contemporary culture. Likewise, it was urged not to treat the LGBT community in isolation from other marginalized groups. I mean, I don't believe in applying labels to anybody. Why apply a label? But anyway, there were calls from the focus group for an apology from the church. This submission suggested that even though the church rarely condemns gay people these days, it indirectly creates an atmosphere where physical, psychological, and emotional abuse of gay people is tolerated and even encouraged. I mean, that's not church teaching. Indeed, the visceral clarity of this particular focus group gave life to a rather more tentative and generalized positions of inclusion offered elsewhere, pointing to the value of hearing directly from the voices of excluded and disaffected. Sexuality in relationships. It was evident that sexuality, sexual ethics, and relationship issues inform people's decisions in relation to mass attendance, reception of the Eucharist, and many other aspects of the church life. One submission asserted that the way in which people, both clergy and lay, were formed within the church in relation to the understanding of sexuality and sexual sin has been a source of great suffering to many. There were requests for re-examination of the church's teaching and revision of the understanding of human sexuality in the light of recent scientific and sociological research. This is copy-paste what the Germans and what Cardinal Hollerich have been saying. So we will reevaluate church teaching in light of scientific and sociological research. So, we could be updating church teaching every 50 years if that's the underpinning logic for church teaching, alongside the recognition of the lived realities of LGBTQI and other couples. Similarly, it was asserted that the church teaching could be more compassionate to women's health, well-being and the raising of families. Considering many circumstances, including financial ones, it was suggested that the theology underpinning church teaching on sexuality is one strand of a far richer tapestry. Okay, so scientific and sociological research, I suppose, like in 50 or 100 years, if a man said, look, I'm very happy with my 3 wives, like Muslims, if a Muslim man wants to convert with his 3 wives into the Catholic Church, I suppose we could say, look, scientific and sociological could allow a man to have more than 1 wife in the Catholic Church. I'm just asking the question, how do we square that? For divorced and remarried, the church's rules and regulations seem draconian. Some divorced and separated people believed they could not receive the Eucharist even though they had not entered into a second relationships. Others described the exclusion by priests from any active role in the parish because of their status. It was stated that some priests avoided the strict implementation of the teaching regarding those in second unions receiving the Eucharist, and while this was appreciated, it was also seen as turning a blind eye to reality. Honest open engagement and accompaniment with those in second unions was called for, to name the issue and to dialogue. Calls to make the process of applying for a declaration of marriage nullity easier and more accessible were also received. I mean, the church has been doing that for years. Let's see. Another group identified as feeling excluded from the life of the church were single parents. It was felt that all parents who wish to bring up their children in the church should experience welcome and support. I don't know who is saying that a single parent could be excluded from the church. Anyway. Adult faith formation. The synodal process highlighted serious weakness in adult faith formation and development in Ireland. Amazing. We haven't taught the faith in secondary schools. We do not teach the faith. Of course, there's going to be weakness in adult faith development because it's infantilized. We've infantilized the faith. We have children's masses, and as soon as kids reach teenage years, they're out. Why would they get involved? Many of the submissions reported that people found it hard to engage with questions and concepts, the language relating to communion and mission. There is a felt need among many respondents for safe and dynamic spaces where people can come together to talk deeply about the faith and increase their knowledge of it. One submission stated, "Our spiritual growth is stunted." Of course it is. It hasn't been taught. You haven't been taught the faith. People don't understand. As adult members of the church, we are not sufficiently grounded in our faith and do not have the confidence in speaking about our love of God. Of course, it's not being taught. Many submissions stress the declining number of priests and religious means that the church is heading for a crisis, as there will be very few people properly prepared to step into leadership and faith development roles. The need to provide continuous professional development for religious education teachers in primary and secondary schools was also highlighted. Religious education teachers. You see, this is the whole problem with this. You could nail everything down on this. Religious education teachers. They're not Catholic education teachers. Religious education teachers. RE. This is the whole problem in Ireland. We've bundled our faith formation into a school system, into it's a job, and children don't understand or love the faith because of what we've done. I mean, I know there's many good primary school teachers, preparing kids for sacraments, but take faith formation out of schools. Take it out. It's not the place for faith formation. Kids don't learn about the faith in schools. It's the high road to atheism. That's simply it. There's also crucial contribution in the community of the faith today. Anyway. One submission outlined there is a crisis in transmission of the faith rather than a crisis of faith. Absolutely. We've not been able to teach the faith. I mean, it's obviously because we don't, our curriculum doesn't teach Catholicism. It doesn't teach people about the church. It teaches them a philosophy of Christianity that's Protestantism. In effect, it's washed down Protestantism. It's not the faith. And anyway, liturgy. There's a sense that funerals and other special occasions are celebrated extremely well, but there's a need to be more creative and engaging in the liturgies. Oh my God, 50 years after Vatican II, how much more creative, engaging liturgies do you need? I mean, let's just turn it into an entertainment session. So we'll before every funeral and every mass, we'll just say like, Can you let us know the submissions of what you'd like to see in next week's entertainment session here at the church, and we'll put that on for you. Creative and engaging liturgies. Oh my God. People have forgotten that the purpose of the liturgy is to praise and worship God. That is the centre of it, not about engaging us. But anyway, as we haven't taught the faith, people don't know what the liturgy is. They don't know what they're supposed to do there. Some feel that the church's liturgies are boring. Of course they do, because they don't understand what it's supposed to do. They don't understand it. They can't remain in a church for half an hour and 40 minutes. Boring, monotonous, jaded and flat. Yes, of course it is. Because you don't understand what is happening there. The holy sacrifice of the Mass. That they are no longer speak of people's lives. There was a desire expressed by response that for the full participation in the laity throughout the liturgy. I mean, I hear this and I despair. And a wider, more diverse group of people, including women, to take part. A minority seeks the view to a return of the Latin Mass and pre-Vatican II celebrations. Oh, I wonder, yes, a minority. Tiny minority, aren't we? 5,000 Catholics in Ireland, but we're tiny. I'm sorry if I'm very passionate about this. So people understand I'm passionate about my Catholic faith. I just feel so sad when I read what is happening here. The Eucharist is highly valued, so much that there is a desire for all to be able to receive, including those who are currently excluded. There was concern that the sacraments of the First Holy Communion and Confirmation are seen solely through the lens of school, and a desire for those preparing for the sacraments will participate in the whole life of the Church. Homilies are frequently described as being too long, ill-prepared, irrelevant, monotonous, and not always connected to life. Church language in the liturgy is seen as archaic, non-inclusive, and hard to understand. Well, if you haven't been taught the faith, of course you're not going to understand it. Particularly the language of the Old Testament readings and liturgical prayers. There is a clear call for simpler, user-friendly, inclusive vocabulary. Yeah, let's rewrite the Gospel and the Bible to suit our time. The power of prayer is very much valued, as well as the presence of music and song. Some participants felt a great sense of love for our devotional practices, and others talked about the power of the sacrament of reconciliation. Some participants longed for the return of house masses, station masses, and particular feasts. It was requested that Laudato Si and a greater presence of environmental issues be part of our liturgies, particularly at certain times of the year. I mean, if this thing about environmental issues, it ad nauseum in the media, ad nauseum. I don't want to go to church and hear about environmental issues. I want to go to church and hear about Christ, our faith, God. I mean, at the end of the day, the purpose of the church is to lead us to heaven. I mean, I'm not playing down environmental issues. The church is not Greenpeace. The church is giving a different message. There were requests to move mass times so they did not clash with working hours, family time, and sporting occasions. Yeah, this is the thing, because Sunday now is not the day of God. We have to, let's move the mass out of the way and put our needs in front of the Church of God. There was also a sense that in the future people may not be reached through the liturgy, so a prior step is required in relation to encountering Christ on a personal level. The issue of youth and the question of how the Church might engage them emerged universally across the synodal process. Multiple dioceses and organisations noted the absence of young people in parish communities. Of course they're absent. They don't understand the faith. Their families don't understand the faith. And many submissions articulated the view that young organisations provide a home for young people that is more welcoming than that in parishes. There was an openness and honesty in responses from young people. They identified that faith and with the gospel message and what we are called to as church. One response clearly conveyed the sentiments expressed by so many. The one thing we as young people look for is sincerity. Absolutely. In many instances, it was felt that the church lacked this, and indeed pastoral awareness of the significant challenges faced by young people today. One notable example given was the mental health crisis faced by many young people. Of course they have mental health practices. Sure, they're consumed by drugs, sex, porn. I mean, their whole life is lived on a phone. What would we expect? Because we do not teach them the Catholic faith. They don't have access to how Catholicism is lived in a community. And then we're wondering why there's a mental health crisis. Many young people were critical of the church regarding the role of women, clerical celibacy, and the handling of abuse crisis. A significant number disagreed with the church teaching on sexuality, and the church's position on sex was considered as a barrier to participation of some young people. On the other hand, some people said that for them the church's teaching on the sexuality was a welcome challenge. Go figure, yes, because the world is, sex is whatever you want. You can do whatever you like, and sure, and people will find out it just destroys so many people because women are used as objects for men. One submission commented that the pursuit of authenticity, truth and beauty and the goodness which the church has to offer is what is most attractive about the faith. Amazing. It is striking to note that whilst dioceses noted the absence of young people in parishes, particularly young groups, were able to offer a kind of faith community for young people desired. Young people feel significant pressure from their peers and wider society when they express their faith and engage with the church. It is significant that for young people who have not engaged with or found vibrant communities where they can belong, they become indifferent to the faith. Many young people do wish to engage in the church, yet deficiencies in current pastoral practice have resulted in a marked disconnect between them and the church. The question of how the church might accompany them was engaged as an urgent one. Education and catechesis. The topics of religious education, catechesis, faith formation and discernment was mentioned frequently. The actual faith community will need to educate and lead our children in the faith. Absolutely. I mean, we need to take educate faith formation out of the schools. There was wide awareness that traditional cooperative faith transmission model in the parish home school is no longer working. Hasn't been working for 30 years. Many submissions suggest that the Spirit is prompting the Church in Ireland to remove sacramental preparation from schools. I agree in favour of parish-based formation programmes. The National Pre-Synod Assembly recognised the shortcomings of the current model and called for discernment on how to address this challenge. If children are to encounter Christ in their sacramental preparation and be formed as intentional disciples, perhaps more charismatic accompaniment at a parish level is required. Absolutely. Related to the topic of education and catechesis is the awareness that the skills necessary for discernment, which are crucial for making decisions in synodal style, are lacking at all levels. When discernment is not prayerful, collaborative and deliberative in a co-responsible way, it can lead to mistrust, transparency and formation in discernment are therefore needed. Family. Many of the submissions placed a strong emphasis on the central place of the family in all three elements. Okay. COVID-19 pandemic greatly impacted religion and faith in different ways. Gathering, expressing faith in physical places of worship was restricted, especially at parish level. Didn't happen in other countries. Poland never closed any of their churches. They continued to say Mass all during the pandemic. The closure of churches and containment of ministry during lockdowns presented a marked shift in the life of the church during this period. Of course it did. I mean, we were working in factories all over Ireland, 8 to 12-hour shifts. People were working everywhere. And yet we turned the church into a non-essential online service. That's what was done. This shift generated deep feelings of isolation, abandonment, pain and hurt, especially amongst the elderly and those who on their own, as well as palpable sorrow for grieving families, arrived from the restrictions on church liturgies and pastoral care at the time. If the church had stood up to the government, none of that would have happened. And yet they rendered themselves non-essential. The church is a family. You don't treat your family like this. You don't look at your family from behind a mask and treat them as infectious agents because they don't understand what church means. Top down. Bishops did not understand what the church means, and we can give them the benefit of the doubt for the first 2 months maybe. Okay, March, April. 6 to 8 weeks. After that, no. If other countries, Sweden never closed any churches. The Catholic Church. If you went to Gothenburg in Sweden, parish of Christ the King never closed their church, maintained services all during the pandemic. Their communities were not wiped out. It was an own goal for the Catholic Church in Ireland to render itself completely non-essential. I mean, the Guinness factories and the potato chip factories and Tesco's and Lidl's and Aldi's and Dunnes Stores and the porn industry, all of that industry remained working all during the pandemic as essential services. And yet the Church in Ireland rendered itself non-essential. Many felt that COVID accelerated an already deep decline in the Church in practice and general engagement. Others remarked that it prompted a new vision for restructuring and rethinking what it means to be church. It necessitated alternative liturgical and ritual responses as liturgical life moved to digital platforms. Liturgical life moved to digital platforms. I can say all during the pandemic we had Mass. I knew 30 more plus priests in Ireland who said Mass all during the pandemic. We were not going to go to digital platforms to receive the sacraments. That's crazy. If friends and family could go to Mass every single week in Sweden and in Poland, why couldn't we do it in Ireland? Something really, if we look at what was happening in Africa, nothing shut down there. We seem to be so deluded that our leaders in the church could not think critically about what was going on. Some Catholics engage fully with this possibility. Online communication has generated new possibilities for formation and training. Yes. Many participants mentioned that during the pandemic they missed gathering and socialising when going to Mass. Well, I continued to gather and socialise all during the 2 years. I wasn't going to be locked in my house. But COVID placed huge financial pressures on individuals, and the rise in the cases related to mental health. Go figure. Domestic violence and addiction reflect the stress placed on families and communities by the pandemic. And the church did nothing. Bishops did nothing. They folded. They were the only leaders. Talk about an own goal. There's a deep sense of grief, loss and pain among people who lost family members during this period and who could not visit loved ones in nursing homes or care facilities. Young people felt isolated by their peers and still feel they have lost out. Absolutely. They were brainwashed. We were brainwashed for the last 3 years. Simply incredible. More positivity, prayer at home and appreciation of the family as domestic church grew. Families slowed down and became more present to each other. A healthier work-life balance emerged as people enjoyed creation and more aware of the need to protect the environment. For many, the synodal listening gatherings were the first in-person events people attended in many months of restrictions, and even though there were some nervousness, these gatherings were grateful in the opportunity to reconnect with the faith community. Anyway, culture. Okay, I'll let you read that. I'll post the link below. Notable issues that were not strongly present in the consultation. Conscious that the Holy Spirit also speaks in silence and absence, it is important that we consider what the Holy Spirit is saying to us through the silence around significant issues and the absence of certain people and groups in the process. The fact that some issues did not surface in a significant way also says something about the Church in Ireland. Yeah, we haven't taught the faith. In the assessment of feedback from the diocesan and group consultations examined at the National Pre-Synodal meeting, it was noted that the following issues did not emerge in a significant way. The wider ecumenical and interfaith context. Okay, I'll let you read through that. Environment, I'll let you read through that. Social justice. Sacramental life of the Church. While there was a strong focus on the participation and renewal of the celebration of the Eucharist, there was little mention of other sacraments and the importance of Christian discipleship and personal and communal relationship with Jesus Christ. In reading the various syntheses and submissions, it seems that faith is often more implied than expressed explicitly. However, it may be that in Ireland, faith is more often mediated institutionally, and thus it can be a focus on structures rather than relationship. The question also emerged whether many Catholics are sacramentalized but not evangelized. Yeah, good point. Missionary outreach of the Catholic Church in Ireland. Over the last 2 centuries, the Catholic Church in Ireland has played a significant part in the modern missionary movement in the Catholic Church. Today, there's a strong cohort of Irish missionaries working on mission. Equally, there are lay networks throughout the country supporting today's missionary activity, individually and through organisations. Aid agencies such as Stroke and Irish Church Outreach for Development have also very well supported. In some missions, there is little reference to the Church's participation in the universal mission of the Church. Okay, I'll let you read through the rest of that. Conclusion. The national synthesis offers reflections on Irish context that are helpful to the global task, reading the signs of the times, as well, of course, as informing future stages of the Irish synodal process. Okay. It is noted in spiritual conversations at the National Pre-Synodal Assembly that schisms happen because people stop talking. Let us keep talking and the Holy Spirit will reveal the path. There is a challenge to sustain the encounter and participation in nature of reality. I mean, if I ever, when I have known many Catholics that have tried to talk in the church, and maybe we're too aggressive or something, but we don't seem to be listened to. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. The General Secretary of the Synod Encounter Teach Synthesis concluded by indicating the steps to be taken in response to the recognized that which was recognized as the call of the Holy Spirit, highlighting in particular those points regarding which it is considered important to solicit the further discernment in the Church. In answer to this, we point to the fact that across various submissions and syntheses, many issues emerge consistently, including a strong desire for women's involvement in leadership and ministries, ordained and unordained, and additionally a concern regarding the Church's approach to LGBTQI community and to the hurt experienced by its members. There was also a call for greater involvement, lay involvement and participation. Some obstacles in canon law which limit the full realisation should be revisited. Simultaneously, the Church of Ireland can explore ways in which the call of the Holy Spirit, as articulated in the diocesan faiths, can be advanced. Well, do we know if all of this is what the Holy Spirit is asking? You know, there's lots of spirits moving in this process, certainly. Anyway, that's the 25-page document, and there are some notes here. So I just skimmed through that document. I was just doing a brief outline, and I do encourage you to read through it. And if I feel frustrated, I do apologize. Please accept my apologies. And I know that document was prepared with good intentions and so forth. What something that I found, and I'm just going to think when I read through it, what's absent from that document, okay? So the document was talking about women 24 times. The laity was mentioned 7 times. Okay, so women 24 times, laity was mentioned. Men was mentioned once. Now, people could say, oh, but the church is hierarchical and there's clergy there, okay? But, okay, 99.5% of men in Ireland are not clergy, okay? So, you know, the glaring absence of men's apostolates. For example, what are the great issues stopping men being more involved in the faith today? What are they declaring it? Like, if you look at, we're talking about gender-based violence. We're talking about, I mean, another thing, I mean, it's quite incredible. You know, it's quite incredible that this is the church, the myopic, blind church. We've had 18,000 abortions in Ireland. 18,000 abortions. 2019, 2020, 2021. Over 18,000 abortions. Okay, that's 18,000 men and 18,000 women who have decided, for whatever reason, 36,000 people, they've decided that they're not going to have the child that they've fathered and mothered. I mean, abortion and pro-life, not even once mentioned at all in that document. Not even mentioned. Okay? So, like that, what's absent? There's nothing there for men in that document. There's clergy. There's a little bit about laity. There's a lot about women. There's nothing there for men. What is the church offering men in the church? Like, where is men's apostolate? Dealing with men's issues, that drug addiction, pornography, sex. Men and women have viewed the world vastly differently. And in that document, you're trying to talk about faith formation. You're trying to reach people that the church can transform, the grace of God can transform, and you've completely sidestepped 49%, really, of the population in Ireland. Laymen. I'm talking about laymen, not church. Laymen, okay? The whole aspect of the apostolate targeting men. Because I tell you, if you have good men, if you have good fathers, if you have good young men, they will have good families. They will treat their children well. They won't face the mental health issues caused by drugs, caused by sex, caused by pornography. All of these problems, which are predominantly male. Okay? You don't have those problems. You can open them up to the immense spiritual reality of our Catholic faith. I mean, the sad things that are missing. I mean, our Blessed Mother isn't mentioned there. Rosary not mentioned there. Very little on devotions. Eucharistic adoration not mentioned there. Eucharistic renewal. I mean, the bedrock of our faith, guys, is to encounter Christ, person to person. Who is he? It's not about me. All this thing, we have to make church, the liturgy is this, the liturgy is that. The Mass is the praise and worship of God. I mean, I don't know, do the church see what they have done to the faith in Ireland? They have just buried it. Let's bury it. And this report, let's make it a social justice NGO organization, purely horizontal, do you know what I mean? It's quite incredible. And I mean, it's an own goal for the church. Now, where were the men standing up, the church leaders or women standing up, calling during the pandemic? As we faced into that September in 2020, that September, that second lockdown, after we had a summer where we could have Mass, it didn't make sense, guys. Not when all over the world, other countries were offering the sacraments, we were having Mass, and the church just folded. And even today, our local cathedral here in Ballina, they can't even put holy water back into the church after 2.5 years. Do you know what I mean? This is what's absent from that report is quite staggering. It's very, very sad. And I'm just saying, you want inclusion, but you cannot just say, you cannot treat men and women, you cannot form men and women exactly the same way. The formation for men has to be slightly different than formation for women. It really does. If you look at secular groups and what's happening in the world, you see that. The challenges that men face and the challenge that women face are different, and it's not been voiced in that report. It's not been voiced at all there. What is in it for the 49.8% of Catholics left in Ireland? The issues that we have to focus on in order to bring men back into the church. Authenticity, sincerity, radical authenticity, as they've mentioned there. I mean, it's very, very sad to see what's in that document, in a sense, because it's a document of so many people. Do you understand what the church is and what Christ is asking us to do in the church? Do you understand the mission of the church? Okay, so you're opening up a process to renew the faith. Okay, well, let's start. What is the mission of the church? What is the mission? What is the mission? Has anyone sat down? Okay, the mission of the church is the salvation of souls, to bring people to heaven. That is the only mission of the Catholic Church. And the preferential option for the poor, you could add. It's true. Our salvation is obtained by encountering Christ in the other, helping the other. If we were truly Catholic, would we have a society that we have today? I don't know. I don't think there's any one solution. But teach the faith. Teach the faith. You cannot teach the faith if you're not leading people to know Christ personally in the Eucharist, in prayer. Pray with other people. The sad reality, if you have good, as I said, no mention of the pro-life issue, no mention of the stain of abortion of our society, not even once mentioned in that document, because the hierarchy and Irish Catholics don't care, from what I can see. Where's the outreach to those 36,000 people that have aborted their child? How are we going to count? How are we going to stop that? What are the programs that we're going to put in place to ensure that we don't have 6,666 abortions like we had the first year? Not even mentioned there. Do we care? Does that issue even resonate with Catholics anymore? Because it's not mentioned there. Our Lady isn't mentioned there. The obvious things. I mean, it's... what was it? What more can I say? And if I sound frustrated, I am frustrated, because I love the faith. I deeply love my faith, but I'm so sad that people can't see what they're missing. That's the great tragedy of this. But look, it's not. We have to work with joy in trying to bring them to that encounter. But as a man, I've read that report as a man, and I'm saying, how are you going to reach Catholic men in Ireland? Do you know what I mean? How are you going to reach them? How are you going to engage them? Not just to be clerics and to be priests, bishops, deacons, and so forth. That's a minority of men that are in the church. What about the rest of the men? How do you engage them in the church? Men's prayer groups, men's ministry. You can say the exact same for women. How are you going to engage with them? Because the way we'll move this process, that's fine. If you want to focus on bringing women up in the church, then you're going to end up like in the Anglican Church, where there are more women priests now than men, and men just feel disengaged. They won't get involved in that. Why would you? Men will get engaged in the faith when they see strong men, authentic men engaged in the faith. That's simply it. You have to understand the dynamics here in play, and not be playing into what the world does have to offer. When men can be men and women can be women. If a man wants to be a man, if a man wants to be a woman, sure, that's fine. Take a few hormones and your bits are removed, and sure, you can be a woman. I mean, this is what the world is offering us. This report is just a mirror image of Irish society and what the world is offering. Is that the path we're going to lead Catholicism down to? Because it won't engage. I can tell you. It will do absolutely nothing to renew the faith. You need to renew the faith. You need to renew the family. And you need to form the family in the faith. so many young people would not be depressed if they knew the faith, if they were formed in the faith in the family. Anyway, look, let me know what you think in the comments, and sorry if I feel a little defensive or a little angry in this presentation, but it's sad when you know and you've experienced the beauty of the Catholic faith. It's sad to see it that people can't see what's there before their eyes, which is Christ in the Eucharist. Transformative Christ in the Mass. The Mass isn't about, oh, it's dry and it's boring and it goes on and the priest is up there in the altar. It's the sacrifice of the Mass, which wasn't mentioned at all in this document either. Weren't sure. Because who knows? People don't understand what's happening in the mystery of the Mass. You know, the Mass is not about you. It's about the praise and worship of God. It's all about God, not about us. Full participation in the Mass is us going to Mass to start off with. That's the first step to participation. It's not an entertainment show when all of us are up there like a Christmas pantomime and we all have different parts to play in this show. That's not what the Mass is. You know, and that's actually destroyed the faith in the Mass, in Christ and in the Eucharist by turning it into some entertainment show. Anyway, very long today. God bless. Take care. Bye bye.